My family declared me dead to steal the estate. Then the chain of custody ledger brought me back. Grief never knocked. Paperwork did. A cream envelope with a county seal waited in my mailbox like a neighbor who knows your schedule better than you do. It crackled between my fingers on the walk back to the apartment, a quiet sound that still managed to make the afternoon feel smaller. Inside, a certified copy of a death certificate lay too flat to be real. My name, Logan Pierce, printed where the universe had always put air. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. Time, 3:11 a.m. Attending physician, Dr. Meredith Crane. The signature floated on the page with the cheerful confidence of something copied too often. Why kitchen has the decency to be ordinary when I need it to be. A chipped mug, a drying rack that only dries, a fridge that hums like it still believes in utility bills. I set the certificate on the counter and watched the light from the window turn the embossed seal into a coin. The words did not blink. The apartment smelled faintly of detergent and yesterday's oranges and the cheap wax of an old floor. Nothing in the room agreed with the page, least of all the sound of my own breathing. The envelope included a second document, a tidy letter addressed to the estate of Logan T. Pierce. The typeface had the personality of a courthouse hallway. Probate hearing scheduled for Friday. Reading of last will and testament for my grandfather, Warren Pierce. Attendance limited to interested parties. Distribution of assets to follow. The letter treated me like a legal concept, not a person who still had laundry in the machine. I read it twice. The second time, the room felt 5 degrees colder for no meteorological reason. Evidence behaves when it is alone. It misbehaves when it meets a drawer. I pulled my wallet, held my driver's license beside the death certificate, and listened to logic try to narrate. I checked my pulse the way a child checks a loose tooth, fascinated by the insistence of proof. My phone face recognized me because code respects repetition. The certificate did not because fraud respects audacity. On the kitchen island, 2 truths shared an elbow and refused to nod that I live 3 flights up in a building that used to be a bakery and still remembers heat. The hallway smells like bread on rainy days and hallway on all others. I climbed to the attic where I keep boxes labeled family like a joke I inherited. The last will I remembered from Grandpa Warren rested inside a manila folder decorated with a paperclip that had given up its will to be oval. He'd split things fairly, he'd said, in a voice that made fairness sound like furniture. The ink on the copy wasn't aggressive. It just existed in a way that felt older than my doubts. The death certificate's physician bothered me first. Dr. Meredith. Crane smiled from a billboard near the highway. That sold relief and Botox under a single phone number. She was the kind of doctor who held a pen like a weapon in commercials, not the kind who signed pronouncements at 3 in the morning. The certificate's form had inch-wide margins that looked like they'd been taught to be margins by a template, not by a bureaucracy. The security background lacked the granular noise a photocopier always suffers to capture. My hands made a small tint over the paper as if shadow could force honesty or at least a confession of tone. When I pressed the page against the counter's wood, the seal wobbled in a way pressure never does. The camphor smell I expected from fresh embossing had been replaced by office air, a sweet, dry nothing. The registration number matched the county schema, but the check digits misbehaved, a small sin no one would notice unless they believed in check digits. I believed like a man who has once mistaken coincidence for comfort and learned not to repeat my grandfather's lawyer. Back when we still met in rooms with carpet that believed in vacuuming. Had a habit of time-stamping every email with a footer that looked like a watermark. I searched my archive, found his last message, a holiday. Greeting with a scanned note from Warren about keeping the farm and the family, which was what he called the 2 acres. Behind the craftsman he built in 1965, and felt the first flicker of something hotter than panic. There had been no mention of me dying then, for the obvious reason that I hadn't. The probate notice suggested a future that needed me dead to be convenient. I made coffee, strong enough to argue with the afternoon, and laid out my battle in the shape of domesticity. Certification numbers, doctor registry, mortuary register, cremation permit, obituary posting. If I had been declared dead, the county's other organs would have learned it. Death is a clerical act before it is a metaphysical one. I checked county search portals that don't pretend to be user-friendly. My name surfaced in no obituaries, no cremation permits, no mortuary schedules. The only thing that insisted I was dead was a page in my kitchen that smelled like toner and a letter that needed me quiet. Evening gummed up the window glass the way August does. My phone buzzed with a calendar invite I had not made. Reading, Estate of Warren Pierce. The sender was a paralegal I did not recognize at a firm whose domain looked like the kind of name you invent when your first choice is taken. The invite pinned Friday, 9 a.m., and auto-complete the location to a conference room I knew too well. Fake plants, real coffee. A view of a parking lot unashamed of itself, I thought of my grandfather's watch, a sturdy thing with a face that catches light like a lens, and the way he tapped it when we were late to breakfast. He had never loved ceremonies. He loved witnesses. I held the death certificate up to the light and watched the microprint at the bottom show its costume. Gaps where letters should close, a lowercase g that borrowed its tail from a font pack. If I had to die, my ink demanded better manners. 9:12 p.m. My inbox coughed up an auto-reply from the county registrar's generic address. Your request will be processed in the order received. I wasn't sure which request I had made, a meta one to the universe, or the neat one to the clerk asking about record authenticity. My hands learned steadiness from necessity. I filled out a challenge form on the county site, the kind that allows 3 upload fields and assumes you have fewer papers than stories. I attached my license, the certificate, and the probate letter with file names that sounded like an argument. Night arrived with the feel of a room that has been told a secret it cannot keep. In the stairwell, someone laughed in a way that belongs to sitcoms. I went down 3 flights, checked the lobby mail slots, found nothing, and came back up to the kind of air that smells lightly of dust and slightly of alarm. My name looked wrong on the page not because of the letters, but because of the context. Death is a sentence. Someone had replaced the period with my signature. Sleep visited the building, but not my apartment. I sat at the table with a yellow pad like an accountant's witness and wrote questions that read like handles. Who benefits? Who files at 3:11 a.m.? Who has access to Grandpa's lawyer's calendar? Who prints death? I placed the pad on the certificate and waited for them to argue. Paper, when stacked, sometimes invents a tone at 7:02 a.m., as if acknowledging the concept of mourning. My phone chimed with a delivery notification from a crematorium 2 towns over. Certificate pickup notice. Pierce, Logan. The system wanted a signature. The button offered reschedule or confirm like I was picking a time for a couch. I stared at the screen until the options felt obscene, then took a screenshot that caught the timestamp and my refusal to be tidy. I ironed a shirt I reserve for job interviews and funerals and the kind of meetings where you force truth to speak a little louder than process. I placed the death certificate into a clear sleeve and slid it into a binder I hadn't named yet because naming things gives them permission. Outside, the sky had learned its best impression of cheerful. Inside, a line had been drawn around me that did not include me. People say the dead don't attend their own funerals. I intended to attend my reading. But first, I planned to visit my grandfather's house, the one with the porch swing that complains like a conscience. If the will was about to be read to a room that had already agreed, I wasn't in it. I wanted to see the place it named before anyone else opened its drawers, and on the certificate, the physician's name looked up at me like a puzzle that had been cut with dull blades. That I wrote Dr. Meredith Crane on the top of my pad, that I underlined the time. 03:11 a.m. I left the apartment before the coffee cooled enough to drink. Binder under my arm, alive enough to make the page feel stupid. My grandfather's porch had a way of measuring you before you reached the steps. The swing complained like a violin tuned too tight. The railing smelled faintly of linseed oil and summers that refused to become history. I parked at the curb and took in the first wrong thing. The lawn had been trimmed with the geometry of an open house, not the lazy ovals Warren favored when the heat made precision feel like vanity. The second wrong thing waited at the threshold, doormat aligned to the millimeter, bristles still shedding the same plastic hairs new brushes shed. Someone had tidied a life as if tidiness itself could inherit. Inside, the air had lost its argument with lemon cleaner. Frames along the hallway hung straighter than memory allows. Dust had been erased instead of moved. The bowl on the foyer table held the exact number of keys you would place if you needed a photograph to say home without fingerprints. My grandfather's mug, white, chipped at the handle, sat on the kitchen counter in a perfect diagonal like a prop asked to suggest coffee. The ring it usually left on the oak had been scrubbed into a pale ellipse, a ghost that would need time to return. I opened the fridge because refrigerators are better witnesses than people. The mustard had rotated label out. The jam jar's rim wore no sugar. The gallon of milk was new, 2 days old, the pull ring intact. Warren hated new milk because it tasted like cartons, and he would have opened it just to give it air. Staged kitchens confuse appetite with order. They always forget that old men leave dents in butter. The mailbox out front had swallowed more than it admitted. Tucked behind flyers, a crematorium notice repeated the tone from my phone. Pickup. Instructions in a font that drifted half a point between lines, as if the document had been composed by someone who believed that typography is a rumor. The letterhead logo bled into the paper with toner flattening where ink should have bled out. The address block used smart quotes on one line and dumb ones on the next. I photographed everything against the rusty flag so the timestamp could find a context it liked. Back at the kitchen table, I spread the papers like a map and set the death certificate where the son could interrogate it. The doctor's name, Meredith Crane, moved up the list from curiosity to problem. The state medical board search took its time like all sites built by committees, and then it surrendered a profile with a glamour headshot and a scope of practice that treated emergencies like a fashion faux pas. Dermatology, aesthetics, elective procedures, clinic hours noon to 7, closed weekends, a med spa address I recognized from a billboard that also sold laser hair removal. No admitting privileges listed. No hospital affiliation. No shift that would have placed her near a body at 3:11 a.m. The certificate had trusted a name the way con men trust uniforms that I walked the hallway again. Slower. Eyes tuned for the mistakes that show up when you ask a room to pretend. The bookshelf in the den had been rearranged by spine color. The checkers board on the end table had both sides set for the opening move my grandfather never used. On the desk, the blotter wore a fresh page that refused to curl at the corners. The trash can held nothing because a trash can with nothing is a photograph, not a life. The only object that felt like itself was the old wall calendar, September. Squares crowded with pen, vet, buddy, propane, Warren/Logan breakfast with a half-drawn star next to it. The star had always meant pancakes that I in the bedroom. The closet hung jackets like well-behaved soldiers. But the shoe rack betrayed whomever had played curator. 2 pairs had flipped orientation the way people do when they are tired and do not perform for anyone. Gravity remembers. I took that as a relic of Warren within the theater someone else had built. I lifted the lid on the cedar chest at the foot of the bed and watched the hinge accept the task. Inside, quilts folded with love, not geometry. Beneath them, a cigar box held what cigar boxes always hold when a certain kind of man runs out of categories. Watch bands, screws, 2 wheat pennies, a safety pin, and 3 claim checks from the hardware store. Nothing about death, everything about errands. The claim checks were dated last Tuesday, a day that had come after I was supposed to be dead. The house coughed up one more contradiction in the study. Grandpa's address book, a battered thing with paper tabs bent into fingernails. I ran my finger down C until I found Crane, blank. M for Meredith, blank. He had never written a doctor's name without a phone number. He had written Dr. J. Patel, urgent care, sprain, and Dr. Santos, flu shot truck, when the clinic came to the parking lot in the fall. He had not written the name on my certificate. A liar had borrowed a title and expected a calendar to salute. I stepped onto the back porch where light turns honest and sat on the step that still carried the divot from his boot. The yard was too edged to have been enjoyed. I could see my breath as the afternoon learned to pretend it was evening. Paper had tried to make me gone. Rooms had tried to make him staged. Neither convinced the boards under me that I called the county registrar and left a moral voicemail. Calm, cataloged, the kind that wears timestamps like armor. I filed a fraud alert with the mortuary board, attaching the letter with its traitorous fonts. I messaged the med board to verify whether a dermatologist with a marketing budget had any lawful path to shorter words like pronounced. If bureaucracy is a fortress, you take the outer wall first. The keep can wait. On the drive home, the city insisted on behaving like a city. Bus brakes exhaled. Cyclists made the small gambles that make physics pay attention. A bakery 2 blocks from my place surrendered the smell of sugar and fat and indentations in dough. My phone buzzed twice at red lights. probate reminder from the unknown paralegal, and delivery reschedule from the crematorium that was beginning to sound like a concierge. I took screenshots that caught the chances they were giving me to be a good dead person and saved them where my binder could adopt them. At my kitchen table, I built a witness kit the way carpenters build jigs, meant to make a cut repeatable. Clean sleeves for each exhibit, labels with verbs and dates. A simple theory stated at the top of a yellow page in my worst handwriting. Because bad handwriting makes it feel less like performance. If I'm dead, the county is quiet. The county is not quiet. Therefore, page lies. Beneath it, arrows pointing to things rooms had told me. Butter dents, shoe directions, calendar stars, milk rings, the last Tuesday claim checks. Jurors don't meet houses. Judges sometimes meet details. The reading would happen in the morning, which meant whoever wanted me dead on paper wanted my chair empty in that conference room. Wanted signatures by people who were better at not looking up than at looking in. I intended to occupy my chair with the kind of body the law still has to count. I intended to bring my binder, my license, the state board printouts, and a photograph of the September calendar with pancakes implied. The last thing I did before sleep found me out of spite was to hold the death certificate at eye level and read the time again. 3:11 a.m. Numbers decide if stories are brave or lazy. 3:11 felt like a roll of the fingers across a keyboard. My grandfather would have called it a liar's midnight. He would have laughed and tapped his watch. I slid the certificate back into plastic and placed it by the door. The binder sat on the chair like a square, patient animal. Morning would be a room with coffee and chairs arranged for grief. It would discover it had a witness instead, and somewhere in a clinic with a waiting room painted the color of product. A doctor's headshot would learn what it means to be on a certificate that could not explain itself. Conference rooms always try too hard. This one wore its grief in beige, soft carpet that absorbed sound, fake ficus with a dust line, coffee that tasted like permission. The placard on the door announced estate of Warren Pierce in a font built for male merges. Chairs formed a practiced horseshoe around a lacquered table. I set my binder at the open mouth of the curve and let the room learn I was a problem it should have anticipated. Faces arranged themselves into civility. My aunt measured me with a smile that had rehearsed condolences. A cousin scrolled with the posture of someone confident the future had already been notarized. At the far end, Mr. Denton, the family attorney, stacked embossed folders into an architecture that implied inevitability. A paralegal I didn't recognize lined up pens like arguments that wouldn't have to work hard. On the credenza, a courtesy copy of the will lay stretched flat beneath a dull plexi sheet, like a specimen prepared for polite examination. Paper began with the tone paper prefers. Case caption, date of execution, witnesses memorialized in small caps. I let it speak exactly long enough for the room to forget it hadn't verified me. Then I flipped my binder open and placed a certified copy of my driver's license next to the death certificate like a two-piece puzzle built to mock counterfeits. Under the sleeve, the state medical board printout for Dr. Meredith Crane waited with its glamour headshot and clinic hours. On a third sheet, a screenshot of the clinic's social feed glowed on glossy paper, the timestamp pinned to 3:07 a.m. A fundraiser after-party tagged 6 blocks from the med spa, sequins visible, life busy being alive exactly when I was allegedly not. Rooms have temperature. This one dropped half a degree. Mr. Denton's reading slowed the way windshield wipers hesitate when rain changes its mind. The crematorium letter joined the spread with its wandering fonts, the delivery notification. Email printout nestled beside it, catching the light on the words signature required. At the top of a yellow pad, my single-sentence theory did the work it was built for. If I'm dead, the county is quiet. The county is not quiet. Therefore, the page lies. Beneath it, photographs of all the ordinary proofs houses keep. Butter, dents, shoe directions, September calendar with half a star beside Warren/Logan breakfast. Fell into a line that felt like a witness with better manners than I could manage. Procedure dislikes humiliation. It prefers recess. Mr. Denton requested one without making eye contact with the word Crane. The paralegal swept up phone and folder with a choreography that told me the hallway had become an emergency room. My aunt focused on a coffee stirrer like it contained a smaller, manageable universe. I stayed put and let their absence make space for details. Conference rooms betray themselves in their furniture. The courtesy copy under plexi had been flattened too fast. Its staple shadow didn't match the age of the paper. Along the spine, a compressed blue sliver peeked from the binding like a vein. I lifted the plexi enough to slide a fingertip along the edge and coax the sliver free. A tiny post-it, folded upon itself, released with the sound of a secret changing owner's my grandfather's handwriting had two moods, lists and warnings. This was the second, letters short and square, an engineer's apology for emotion. If they say you are dead, ask for the red book at Pinecrest Crematory. Chain log never lies. The asterisk wasn't decoration, it was a map. At the bottom, two numbers that looked innocuous unless you love systems. PC 514 and CL 27, neatly underlined. I held the paper to the light and saw the oil from his hand where he'd pressed emphasis onto the corner. The note had not been for the lawyer. It had been for the version of me this morning had turned me into. Outside the door, mics picked up. Voices doing the math of panic. Low, fast, full of verbs. Verify, confirm, hold. Inside, the plexi settled back over the will with a sigh like resignation. I slid the post-it under my binder's transparent flap, one layer away from oxygen, and photographed it with the document number visible in the same frame. If a story matters, you build it in pictures as well as sentences. When the hallway returned, it brought polite chaos. Mr. Denton's tie had developed a crease. The paralegal had acquired a second phone. My aunt had adopted the expression of someone auditioning for good faith. Paper shuffled itself into temporary humility. The reading paused as Denton announced a brief continuance, a phrase built to box embarrassment, pending verification of vital records. He kept his tone calm. The stack near his elbow now included a form headed ex parte, before the administrivia. Could disguise the moment. I added one more exhibit to the table. The crematorium notice with its wandering kerning, laid next to my county registrar challenge receipt, stamped with the time. The effect wasn't theatrical. It was plumbing rerouted while the water was still running. The paralegal's eyes tracked the numbers without asking my face for permission to exist. A good paralegal worships numbers. Recess announced itself again, this time as adjournment. People stood with the strange choreography of interrupted ritual. Chairs scraped. Pens were retrieved and then put back as if pens can talk to each other later. I put my binder on the credenza for a beat and, in that beat, saw what panic leaves. Behind, a photocopy of the will's attestation page in the output tray of the office printer, the staple holes misaligned with my own set by a hair. The copy wore a fresh blue highlight over self-proving affidavit, ink still shiny, like someone finally remembered courts prefer documents that can take care of themselves. That I walked out with the note in my binder and the red book lodged in my plans. The elevator turned my face into a reflection and returned it as resolve. Outside, the morning had learned to be noon. A breeze lifted the edge of the probate letter peeking from my folder with the lightness counterfeit never manages. Back on the sidewalk, the city resumed its habit of acting like a city, bus brakes exhaling, a kid bouncing a ball against a rhythm only he believed in, a sandwich board promising soup that probably could not deliver on its adjectives. I turned toward my car and plotted the next cuts. County registrar in person, then Pinecrest Crematory with a sentence and two numbers I intended to pronounce like passwords. PC 514, CL 27. If Warren trusted a chain of custody ledger to behave like a conscience, I could do no less. My phone vibrated with a new calendar entry I hadn't asked for. Disposition review. Pierce. Tomorrow, 8:30 a.m., set by the same paralegal who had written my funeral into her week. I took a screenshot that captured the absurdity and filed it under exhibits. The more a machine insists, the more a ledger blushes to a red light. I held the post-it up to sun again. Oil ghosted in the corners. The letters kept their square shoulders. If you want a note to survive, you fold it until it remembers how. I drove home with a binder that weighed more than paper should and a plan my grandfather had written in a margin he knew someone would ignore. Morning had tried to declare me gone. This afternoon, I had acquired a book to ask for by name. And somewhere, behind a lobby that smelled like sanitizer and lilies, a red ledger waited with a list of hands no one had expected me to read. Pinecrest Crematory looked like a dentist who had decided to learn euphemisms. Low brick, frosted glass, lilies arranged with the careful optimism of places that sell absence as a service. The lobby air had the industrial chill of a walk-in refrigerator. My breath made a cloud I pretended was only temperature. I set my binder on a side table shaped like respect and felt the building try to convince me I had arrived for closure. I had arrived for inventory. Chain of custody is not poetry. It's a staircase. I followed the corridor until carpet gave way to linoleum the color of paperwork and stopped at a counter whose bell had the self-control not to ring. Behind it, shelves held binders in colors that had been chosen to sound like authority. Navy for contracts, green for permits, red for the thing Warren's note had named. Red book waited exactly where a man who loved systems said it would be. The log cracked open with the sound of a spine admitting purpose. Columns marched across the page: case ID, name, source, receipt, disposition, release. The tidy grammar of possession changing hands. My eyes found Pierce, Logan in letters that did not care about their own lie. The row wore a uniform. Source listed county vital records. Batch, receipt timestamp 8/14, not the 3:11 a.m. my certificate bragged about. Disposition read no remains, admin pickup. Release named no morgue, no family. Just a 3-letter code that looked like someone had disguised a shrug. Payments have tells. A square of thermal paper lived behind a plastic flap. Credit AUTH. Last 4/90/34. A merchant slip that could only exist if someone had treated my death like a billable event. The name on the masked card matched a relative who has always loved forms more than outcomes. The address tied to the transaction belonged to a P.O. box that receives holiday cards and subpoenas in equal measure. The signature on the line leaned hard right, not the neat downward pressure of a staffer. I took photographs the way climbers plant pitons: redundant angles, overlapping frames, timestamp visible like a passport stamp. The admin pickup notation bothered me most. Bodies do not take their own walks. Paperwork should not either. Chain handler initials completed the insult. DW in a small square hand I recognized from a generation of envelopes that carried embossed letterhead and sentences you couldn't interrupt. Denton Wilder, Mr. Denton to rooms that fear pause, had borrowed a crematory line as if the alphabet were a private hallway. Warren's note had not been warning me about a building. It had been pointing at a person. I in the margin. A second notation pretended to be humble. Sale, 27. Ledger codes like to believe they are camouflage. They are, at best, breadcrumbs. I flipped to the index stuck to the back cover. CL, 27. Courtesy Liaison, External Counsel. The book had outed itself. The crematory did not invent me. Counsel escorted my paperwork to a finish line and asked a ledger to write it down. The registrar's office. A drive away through a city flirting with lunch. Smelled like toner deciding between ambition and failure. A clerk accepted my challenge packet the way cliffs accept footprints, politely, without promises. I handed over the certificate with its glamorous dermatologist. The crematory log photos, the payment slip that thought grief should swipe, and the calendar invite where a paralegal had scheduled my disappearance. Official voices prefer verbs. I offered flag, freeze, verify, and the only noun that makes rooms do math, fraud. A supervisor appeared as if conjured by capital letters. The monitor filled with forms that eat afternoons and regurgitate orders. A hold settled over my record like cloud cover. The clerk stamped a notice that did not blush. Administrative correction pending. Certificate disputed. The county had, for the first time since this began, said wait out loud. Back home, the apartment remembered me in ordinary ways. Keys hit the dish with a sound that belongs to Tuesdays. The fridge hummed at a pitch that suggests enough milk for coffee. I laid the red book photos on the island and arranged the story until even anger admitted it made sense. Death at 3:11. No hospital, no mortuary, admin pickup at 8:14. Credit card ending 9034. External counsel initials in the chain. Reading scheduled for a body no one had seen. It wasn't grief. It was logistics weaponized into inheritance. The probate clerk, perhaps sensing the day had grown teeth, pushed an email into the world that arrived in my inbox like weather. Hearing held in abeyance, pending vital record verification. Mr. Denton's name appeared at the bottom, see seat like an apology. The paralegal added a calendar correction that sounded like someone speaking softly to a dog. Disposition review, TBD. Systems had begun to back away from the confidence they had borrowed. I still had a watch to tap. Warren's note had given me a second coordinate, PC 514, a batch intake form code the clerk explained on the phone without understanding she had. Batch forms ride with certificates from agencies that prefer stacks to stories. The code linked my case to a night shift upload of vital stats processed by a vendor script that rubber stamps form fields and prints words in slots, because slots are patient. Buried in the vendor's export, a debug line had preserved the upload origin, originating IP, /Wilder Suites/legal/. Scripts don't know to be discreet. They only know to be correct. Denton Wilder's firm sits in a building I dislike for reasons that precede this. Its glass believes it can erase corners. The back-end path carved a trench from that glass to my certificate. The red book had traced the rest. I closed my binder because impatience is a noise courts interpret as disrespect. Instead, I opened a clean page and wrote a theory that behaved like a tool. If counsel needed me absent to move paper, counsel built the absence and paid to make it convenient. Below it, I listed remedies out loud so the room could hear me. Ex parte to compel preservation, motion to disqualify, referral to DA, bar complaint, probate sanctions. Process may be slow. It is not small. Evening scooted in with the kind of cheap gold light that flatters decay. A final email from the registrar landed with the tone only bureaucracy can earn. Certificate suspended. No burial/disposition permits to issue. My legal death had been unplugged. The next power source would have to be braver than toner. I clean the counter because motion empties the hands so the mind can load. Butter Dents reappeared with the quiet authority of things that don't need my permission. I put the crematory slip in a sleeve labeled receipts because the best names are the oldest. On my phone, the probate docket refreshed to show a new entry. Notice of motion, emergency ex parte, filed by Denton at 4:52 p.m. The caption did not admit topic. The velocity did. I returned the binder to the chair by the door where morning can't pretend it didn't know what it was supposed to carry. On top, I placed Warren's post-it, the oil in its corners catching lamplight. Some instructions survive by being small. Night found me reading the red book photos again. The way sailors check knots they already trust. CL 27 still meant counsel. DW still meant Denton. No remains still meant nobody looked. Between the pages, a pattern settled into a shape even tired eyes could recognize. When paper wants a body, it will invent one unless someone asks for the ledger. Morning would be a courthouse. An ex parte that pretends to be urgent for reasons it will not explain. And a judge with a calendar that does not enjoy drama before coffee. I had a binder, a watch I could tap, and a red ledger that had already told the truth once. And the initials in that chain log, DW. We're about to learn what their letters sound like when a court reporter types them beside under oath. Courthouses wake up in fluorescent. Urgency wears carpet. The ex parte calendar moved like a conveyor belt, files hopping onto the rubber, attorneys performing necessity in 10-minute bursts. I set my binder on counsel table with the posture of a problem that refused to be reshelved. Across the aisle, Denton Wilder arranged his stack with the tidy menace of habit, a silver pin aligned to the page edge like a metronome for confidence. My name blinked on the screen as if it had learned to breathe again overnight. Ex parte petitions introduced themselves in whispers that want to be thunder. Denton's caption promised administrative clarity. The prayer beneath it tried to exhume my absence in softer words. Authorize interim distributions to preserve estate continuity. Accept certified vital records. Seal sensitive exhibits for the dignity of the departed. The departed sat 5 feet away, flipping to a tab labeled Red Book. The judge read quickly, eyes practiced at separating drama from verbs. Urgency depends on a room forgetting to measure. My packet answered with nouns that don't raise there. Voice, registrar hold, certificate disputed, Pine Crest chain log, CL 27D. W. Crematory slip, credit last 4/90/34, vendor upload, originating path /Wilder Suites /legal/. The clerk slid each into the document camera. The chain of custody columns filled the monitor like a chessboard that had decided to confess. The judge's pen paused on no remains. Admin pick up the way instruments pause when they find the right key. Procedure prefers prophylaxis. I filed my own ex parte, order to preserve, naming servers, email vaults, case management systems, vendor SFTP logs, and any third-party crematory interfaces, a protective stay on distributions until the vital record corrected, and the kind of relief judges grant when rooms are waking up, temporary suspension of counsel's estate authority, pending explanation of initials that do not belong in chain logs. The language did not accuse. It insisted. Momentum built the way weather does when fronts collide. The judge signed preservation like muscle memory, issued a temporary stay with a date that sounded like a ledge, and turned to Denton with the patience of steel. He countered with a packet that announced a new act, a latest will and testament dated 6 months after the instrument under the plexi, self-proving affidavit attached, signatures in compliant places, witnesses miraculously neat. The PDF, metadata, when coaxed onto the screen, betrayed its route like a child who can't keep a secret. Creator, Wilder Suites PDF Suite. Last saved path / Wilder Suites / legal / probate / Pierce / final _V3. PDF. Created. 2:13 a.m. The hour had become a leitmotif. Process that prefers the dark, discovering that light leaves better fingerprints. Self-proving affidavits are meant to save courts from people. They are not meant to save people from courts. The judge's eyes moved down the page to the notary seal and found the same halo my kitchen had found days earlier, toner behaving like pressure, a commission number that flinched under registry search. A small order tucked itself into the morning. Produce the notary's journal by close of business or admit its absence with consequences. Quiet sentences can be guillotines. Denton asked for a continuance with the tone of a man who expects rooms to rearrange when he names the furniture. The judge offered something smaller and sharper. Afternoon session for initial testimony under oath, limited to upload origins, crematory liaison practices, and vital records workflows. Subpoenas issued from the bench like ballast. IT manager, paralegal of record, Pine Crest liaison, county vendor rep. Names that did not plan to spend lunch reviewing affidavits learned they had become the afternoon's weather. Hallways conducted heat. Outside the courtroom door, my phone vibrated with the registrar's update, the kind of bureaucratic prose that feels like a backbone. Certificate suspended. Notice to all linked systems. No disposition permits shall issue. Alerts sent to courts, crematory, vendors. The digital circulation that had tried to make me a rumor had been told to hold its breath. Systems are slow to apologize. They are fast to comply. I use the hour like a carpenter uses a square. In the basement clerk's office, I filed a motion to disqualify counsel for potential conflict and involvement in disputed vital process, attaching the Red Book CL 27 photo where D.W. lived in a rectangle too neat for coincidence. I added a bar grievance sealed for the state, a copy for the court's eyes only, a note that turned adjectives into policy, normalized verifications. The sentence had migrated from my fridge to a caption. It wore the new room well. The afternoon's testimony arrived with fluorescent honesty. The IT manager from Wilder Suites read his path aloud like a confession. Map drives, /legal /probate /Pierce, auto backup at 2:30 that captured _V1, _V2, _V3 iterations of a will. That was born after the hour a dermatologist had allegedly pronounced me. The paralegal described batch uploads into the county vendor portal using a saved credential shared in the department. The judge lifted an eyebrow the way grammar lifts a comma. The Pine Crest admin explained courtesy liaison initials with a diagram that made euphemism look like policy. The chain log and credit slip made it look like agency. The vendor rep for County Vitals sagged under his codes and admitted scripts, pre-fill fields, and accept remote submissions because clerks like mornings more than midnights. The judge gathered it all with the economy of someone who files reality in drawers. Preservation stayed. Stay on distributions expanded. A forensic image of Wilder Suites' probate share and email vaults would be taken at dawn by a neutral. In-camera review of the latest will would decide whether its ink belonged in this room. Denton was ordered to submit to deposition within 48 hours regarding liaison practices and vendor access. The court reporter's hands did not falter when initials became oaths. The last order landed quiet and final as a gavel at rest. All parties to confer on interim caretaking for Warren's house that did not involve moving a single paperclip until authenticity breathed in daylight. My grandfather's porch swing would keep complaining to no one in particular. That felt like justice's kindest sound. Back home, I placed the afternoon's orders beneath Warren's post-it and watched the oil in its corners catch a different kind of light. The binder had grown heavier without adding pages. Weight is not always a function of paper. The registrar pushed one more alert through to my inbox. Certificate marked fraudulent pending correction. A sentence that felt like a door propped open with a boot. Evening arrived with the dignity of plain things. Street noise that refused to become soundtrack. A kettle that does one job. A window that learned how not to dramatize sunset. I wrote a list that began small and built. Call insurance, secure house, mirror emails, prep DA packet. At the bottom, I gave myself one line that belonged to Warren more than to me. Ask for pancakes when this is done. On the docket, a new entry stamped itself into tomorrow. Order to image Wilder Suites server, custodian of records to appear. The caption did not mention me by name. The consequence did. You cannot disinherit a man with toner if the court has ordered your hard drives to speak. Night put its hand over the city's mouth. Under my fridge magnet, two sentences sat side by side. If they call it help, ask who gets the receipt. Normalize verifications. I had receipts. The court had begun to normalize. Morning would wheel a forensic card into an office that had preferred 2 a.m. to noon. A red ledger had written me back into the room. The server logs would write the rest. Forensics does not care about posture. The neutral examiner wheeled a pelican case past Wilder Suites' glass like a paramedic who refuses to narrate. Imaging servers is a ritual of patience. Hashes announced in numbers that sound like oceans. Progress bars that cross the screen in a crawl built for truth. Outside the conference room, a receptionist stapled something with too much force. Inside, the machine copied without adjectives. Evidence arrived the way winter does. Incrementally, and then all at once. The probate share bloomed into folders, with names that pretended to be modest and were not. Templates, vitals, liaison, heirs. In vitals, a subfolder titled package carried files with timestamps that mapped to the night I had been declared theoretical. One PDF wore a file name that did not know how to be bashful. Death_packet_Pierce_V 2.pdf. Its siblings whispered with the same grammar. creme_pickup_form, physician_overlay, obit_placeholder. A vocabulary of shortcuts wearing ties. Email archives delivered their own weather. Threads with the subject, continuity plan. Pierce traced a choreography between DW. A cousin whose appetite for outcomes has never known restraint. And a paralegal who had learned to use 2 a.m. like a cloaking device. Attachments linked back to the package directory. Links walked forward to the county vendor portal with a browser extension that remembered autofill. A draft message sat unsent in drafts /Denton with a phrase that read like an instruction to the universe. Schedule disposition review once VR confirms. VR had meant vital records. Confirmation had meant a script returning HTTP 200. The latest will folded under scrutiny, where cosmetic confidence always does. In a temp directory, the examiner found will_fresh.docs, a template that had been used for 3 estates this year, its field codes begging the morbid indulgence of autotext. The find that felt like a confession lived inside a keystroke log. Control+H bringing up find/replace. The string, beneficiary A, replaced with C.Pierce. Disfavored, replaced with Logan in a cascade recorded by the program, as if it were a proud stenographer. Metadata kept minutes with missionary zeal. Created 2:13 a.m. Modified 2:24 a.m. Printed 2:27 a.m. Saved as final_v3 at 2:28 a.m. Templates save time. They also save intent. I drove to Warren's house while the server cloned. The porch swing made its small objection to wind. The screen door squeaked in a way a soundtrack would edit out. The house had settled into the nonchalance of dwellings that expect a pause. I walked to the study and let gravity issue advice. In the bottom right drawer, beneath envelopes that had learned to be heavy, a hardback's false spine concealed a manila envelope that carried my name in square letters. Warren had never called me Logan on paper. He called me L. The envelope gave under my thumb like a not giving up. Inside, the antidote to euphemism waited in ruled paper and pen grooves. The anti-fraud memo. A man writes when he understands that process can be purchased. Bullet points took tight turns. Never sign in hospital gowns. No lawyer meets me after dark. No notarizations without journal entry, and ink pressed hard enough to ghost onto the next page. He had listed the crematory's chain log, as if he'd written policy for them. He had referenced Red Book and batch IDs and CL codes like a man who had visited backrooms and taken them personally. The last paragraph took its time the way warnings sometimes do. If anyone says you are not here, check logs, not letters. I built the house that can stand an audit. The sentence stood upright without needing my surprise. Back downtown, the examiner's report grew vertebrae. Screenshots caught /Wilder Suites, /legal/ and footer trails. Logs captured SFTP, pushes to the vendor with a credential labeled liaison. HTML saved copies of obit drafts with lorem ipsum, paused at line breaks that begged to be ghoulish. A compliance memo, probably written in a room where no one risked eye contact with the word ethics, framed courtesy liaison as a service to grieving families. The card last 49034 appeared again in a billing system screenshot where external counsel, admin had been selected from a drop-down. Menus no more than they should. In court. Afternoon wore chalky light like talc. The judge listened to the examiner the way people listen to rain after a dry season. Not surprised, more confirmed. A temporary suspension of Denton's participatory authority dropped into the docket with the unceremonious weight of a sandbag. A special master was appointed to shepherd the estate while documents remembered how to meet their own standards. The room did not clap. Rooms that matter rarely do. The DA intake accepted my binder like a short course. I added the anti-fraud memo and the Red Book photos to a packet that already carried a narrative no film would dare because it looked too procedural to be plausible. The intake officer's eyebrows acknowledged the contradiction humans enjoy: boredom on paper, arson in effect, terms like forgery, filing false vital record, fraud on the court, tampering with evidence learn the shape of our names without our permission. Evening arrived as the kind of gray local weather calls honest. At my kitchen island, I arranged a grid that had learned to be formidable: server images with hash verifications, creme ledger, credit slip, med board profile, obit drafts with placeholder Latin where grief should have been, anti-fraud memo in ink that cut, and a hand that had learned to press. I wrote a sentence at the bottom of the page and left it there to cure. When people privatize process, they bet against light. The registrar closed the loop with a certified correction notice. A document with less drama than a memo pad and more consequence than a press release. Vital record void. Fraudulent. All linked actions reversed. Notices sent to probate, crematory, vendor. The county had run back the event like a tape and told it to undash occurred at A.T. Warren's house. I reset small things that make rooms breathe properly. The mug rotated to the wrong diagonal it preferred. The butter surrendered to its dents. The calendar's star over Warren/Logan breakfast looked lit by habit rather than hope. I left the windows cracked to let lemon cleaner finish arguing with air before sleep. I drafted a motion I did not know I'd get to file and filed anyway. Motion to recognize anti-fraud memorandum as testamentary instruction. Not because I wanted to start a trend, but because my grandfather had predicted a week like this and written rules that deserved a courtroom to say them out loud. The special master's clerk acknowledged receipt at a time of night that suggested old cases teach insomnia, that on the fridge, 2 sentences now read like a creed. Normalize verifications. Check logs, not letters. I added Warren's line beneath, in my worse handwriting, so the priority stayed visible. Build the house that can stand an audit. The house stood. The audit had begun to matter to more than me. Morning would bring a bar committee that disliked toner pretending to be pressure. A vendor whose SFTP server would learn the meaning of audit trail. And an aunt who would decide whether to be relieved or embarrassed in a way that could withstand minutes. I did not plan to manage feelings. I planned to manage documents. And somewhere in a folder labeled package on a server that believed itself invisible, Final_V3 had become an artifact with timestamps that sounded like a confession. Bar committees do not hurry. They accumulate. The acknowledgement arrived in a PDF that wore its seriousness without decoration. Grievance accepted. Preliminary investigation opened. Respondent: D. Wilder. A request for supplemental materials followed with the appetite only regulators possess. Copies of server images, liaison policies, billing slips, and anything that explained why a crematory chain log now read like a deposition. The letter used verbs that travel, produce, preserve, explain, and a date that sounded like a metronome someone else had set. The special master worked with a carpenter's comb. His first act was not theatrical. It was subtractive. The latest will, printed at 2:28 a.m. and carried to court like a credential, lost jurisdiction in 6 lines that walked the room through template bleed. Toner seal, missing notary journal entry, and metadata that wouldn't look him in the eye. He called it void for defect and doubt, a phrase so clean it felt surgical, and slid the plexi back over the earlier, valid instrument the way a lid fits a box meant to keep things safe. Distributions paused. Conduct did not. Forensics finished the work my binder had started. In Denton's sent mail, a message with the subject continuity plan. Pierce bridged motive to method. He had used the tone of professional affection and the content of opportunism. Bullet points about smoothing probate friction, minimizing disputes by confirming VR, and a line that pretended to be empathy and became exhibit. Logan's patterns the last few years suggest he won't contest if this feels administrative. He did not know that apathy ends where ledgers start lying. The cousin's inbox had learned to confess, too. Threads named PC, admin courtesy, and CL. 27 walkthrough sketched rehearsal where procedure should live. Instructions on using the liaison credential. A screenshot of the creme pickup form with a red circle around no remains. Admin. And a table that paired estate assets with anticipated needs that read less like responsible planning and more like a shopping list with legal stationery. In the margin of one PDF, a comment bubble offered an adjective the court would never adopt, but the story could. Clean. Clean, in their usage, meant uncontested. In mine, it meant sterilized of me. Then the thing that rearranged the week landed without ceremony. The special master found, in a banker's box misfiled behind warranty deeds, a sealed rider grandfather Warren had executed the same year. He taught me to change a tire and distrust hurry. It wasn't a codicil in the romantic sense. It was a directive in his square hand, witnessed and notarized with a seal that ghosted onto the next page as if pressure had become a theology. The line that mattered had the shy confidence of someone who prefers verbs to speeches. Fund a scholarship from the farm proceeds for local kids who work with their hands and keep receipts. It named a trade school, a library requirement, and a note about late fees that sounded exactly like him. We do not pay for avoidable chaos. Motive change clothes. A fight I had mistaken for garden variety repositioning. Trimmed some branches, moved some names, stood up, and admitted it wanted a different tree. The farm proceeds, the ones we called sentimental when we were feeling poetic and revenue when we were paying property tax, had been earmarked to leave the family in a way that warmed the county and cooled anyone who believed blood obligates balance sheets. The latest will hadn't just found a different beneficiary. It had internally rerouted the money back to a trust with family officers who could define community as surnames. The scholarship rider had been the rock they needed. To move before dawn, I photocopied the rider onto heavy stock because some pages deserve weight and slid it into a sleeve labeled the way Warren would have labeled it, receipts. The bar investigator asked for a copy and folded it into a file that would make someone who loves status meetings learn a new temperature. The DA's office underlined a phrase in the email where Denton had attached obit placeholders and wrote pattern in a margin that does not tolerate flourished at the house. I reset proof the way you reset a clock after a storm. The porch swing accepted its squeak. The butter remembered its dents. I taped a photocopy of the scholarship directive inside the pantry where he used to keep drywall screws and winter apples and let the paper radiate the kind of authority only ink with witnesses carries. The kitchen adopted its proper smell back. Coffee, wood, a lemon's idea of reputation. The special master convened a status meeting that did not feel like one. He spoke in chores, inventory, appraisals, freeze, audit. He read the rider aloud without theatrics and wrote one sentence into the minutes that made my lungs change size. The court anticipates honoring the scholarship directive subject to verification. Counsel is suspended pending bar review. Rooms do not clap, but air knows how to move differently when something decent happens. After, I drove to the trade school Warren had named and walked the hall where welders learn geometry and teenagers in canvas aprons learn to draw square. The receptionist didn't know my story. She knew how to fog a window with breath and talk me through what tuition, in this county, actually means. I took notes in margins the way Warren did. Numbers, then nouns. Mask, glass, steel, books. A scholarship is a feeling until it pays a bill. Then it is policy. Knight adjusted the room like a level. The registrar's correction notice came back stamped and sealed. The vault systems updated me from dead to regular citizen with the finality only ugly software can deliver. The paralegal who had once invited me to my own reading sent a single-line email acknowledging receipt of the court's orders and nothing else, which is the closest some people come to apology. The cousin's attorney tried the word misunderstanding in a filing that would not survive 2 paragraphs. The DA attached it to a folder titled with a statute, not a sentiment. On my fridge, the 3 lines I had been collecting made accord. Normalize verifications. Check logs, not letters. Build the house that can stand an audit. The house stood. The logs had learned to speak. The audit had found the thing it was supposed to protect. Before sleep, I printed the scholarship directive on decent paper and placed it beside my binder like a future that had finally earned a seat at the table. I wrote a checklist that sounded like logistics because love that works usually does. Foundation account, fiduciary, criteria, announcement, first award cycle. At the bottom, I gave myself a permission my week hadn't allowed. Eat pancakes on Warren's porch when the order signs. On the docket. The next line read order to show cause, disqualification and sanctions. A sentence that had stopped pretending this was delicate. The server images would become exhibits. The red book would become a syllabus. A pair of initials would become a cautionary tale. Morning would bring teeth to the polite words. The bar would ask harder questions. The DA would mark calendars with verbs. The special master would ink a line that turned directive into instruction. And somewhere on a workbench at the trade school down the road, a kid would square a frame, wipe his hands on a rag, and not know his invoice had just been adopted by a man who refused to be killed by toner. Courts don't crown heroes. They ratify instructions. The special master's draft turned into an order with the practical weight of a brick. The Warren Pierce Scholarship would be formalized as a designated subtrust within the estate, funded by the farm proceeds before any family distribution, administered by a neutral fiduciary, audited annually, and paid only to institutions. No checks to people, no facilitators, no smoothing. The order wore verbs that carry: establish, segregate, disperse, verify. A paragraph in the middle captured Warren's handwriting without copying it. Late fees are not a covered expense. The court had learned his sense of humor. The bar committee moved like a glacier with a calendar. A notice posted to its barebones portal: interim suspension pending investigation. D. Wilder. A sentence that felt less like thunder and more like pressure equalizing. Attached was a terse summary: alleged misuse of liaison credentials, irregularities in vital record submissions, toner embossed seals, and contact with a crematory outside accepted channels. The committee does not opine, it boxes. Denton had been fitted for cardboard. The DA sent an intake summary that read like a skeleton finding its muscles: forgery of a vital record, fraud on the court, conspiracy, and a line item for attempted theft by deception predicated on the latest will that had been printed at 2:28 a.m. and retired by noon. The detective assigned used the only adjective I trust in documents: corroborated. Egos speculate. Files corroborate. I drove to Warren's house with a copy of the order on the passenger seat and a carton of diner pancakes the size of a steering wheel. The porch swing protested like an old friend reminded he can still make noise. In the shed, under a tarp that had decided to grow a language of dust, I found the trailer Warren treated like a time capsule: coffee cans with bolts sorted by width, a vise that outlived 2 benches, a cassette deck with a bite out of the play button. Beneath a box of sockets, a plastic case labeled Shop, Tape 1, waited with the patience of objects that survive because they were boring to thieves. Cassettes ask for rituals. I dug out a travel player from a drawer of obsolete optimism, popped new batteries in with the reverence of a museum intern, and fed the tape to a machine that whirred like it remembered how. The voice that filled the trailer was the sound of someone who chose systems over eloquence. Warren, reading his own list so he could get it out of his head. If they come with paper, ask for logs. If they come with midnight, ask for morning. If they come with a notary, ask for the journal and look for the ghost ring on the next page. If they call it help, ask who gets the receipt. He paused to laugh at himself, a dry little cough, and then added the line the court had already stolen and made statutory. Build the house that can stand an audit. I let the cassette run until it clicked from side A to side B, and then let it run again because some instructions deserve loops. Back in the kitchen, I transferred the audio to a WAV file on my laptop, named it Warren_Pierce_fraud_tape.wav, hashed it, and dropped the checksum into my notes like a fence post. Grief is a feeling. Anti-fraud is a procedure. The fiduciary assigned to the scholarship sent a checklist that made me forgive institutions a little: trust account opening, EIN issuance, investment policy statement, distribution rubric, third-party verification. I added a column called Warrenisms and translated policy into his voice. No midnight, no smoothing, no cash, keep receipts. The kidded version of me wanted to scribble a star next to library card required. The adult version of me made it exhibit A. Email made a sound that I've started to recognize as relief. The registrar sent the formal vital record void/correction certificate, a document so unsentimental it could double as scripture. Probate auto-notified everyone on the service list. Distributions frozen to family claimants pending sanctions. Scholarship subtrust exempted and moving to fund. The cousin's attorney attempted a filing with the word miscommunication in it. The docket replied with a minute order that spoke fluent cause and effect. Miscommunication does not create corpses. By dusk, the trade school had already posted an internal bulletin, Pierce Scholarship, pending, with a placeholder application that asked for the kind of proof my week had taught me to love: acceptance letter, invoice, proof of progress, library card barcode. I printed the draft and taped it beside my fridge creed. The sentences read like family now. Night weathered the edges off the day. I stood at the sink rinsing a plate and watched the ghost ring of the notary seal on Warren's scholarship rider emerge under light like a watermark made by stubbornness. My phone lit with a text from an unknown number that resolved into the teller. A photo of her resignation letter filed and accepted, a line that said she'd enrolled in a compliance course she once mocked. People can be systems that learn. Before bed, I walked the binder back to the chair by the door and added exactly one sheet to the top, a one-page announcement I'd written in plain typography. Without flourish or clip art, Warren Pierce Scholarship, for students who fix things. It ended with his sentence, which is what my week had been trying to tell me about love: keep receipts. On the docket, tomorrow had grown teeth. Order to show cause. Sanctions/disqualification. Custodian of records, Wilder Suites, to produce liaison credential logs. Pinecrest Director, to explain courtesy liaison practice under oath. The polite words had stopped. Pretending they were tentative, I slept in a world where my legal personhood no longer depended on toner and where a scholarship had been pulled out of a plan that tried to turn community into a garnish. In the morning, I would carry the cassette file to court on a thumb drive labeled like a warning and let systems do what they can do when asked correctly, and somewhere on a workbench with a vise older than the students who use it, someone would measure twice, cut once, and not know they were about to get an email that would change the way a bill behaves. Sanctions hearings do not shout. They calcify. The morning order read its own spine, show cause, and the courtroom gathered around it like iron around a magnet. The custodian of records from Wilder Suites sat with a laptop that had learned resignation. The Pinecrest Director carried a policy binder thick enough to pass for contrition. The special master kept a legal pad turned sideways, a small rebellion that told me he liked columns. Records have a smell when they're about to confess. The custodian opened liaison credential logs on the document camera, and the timestamps lined up like rivets. 2:06 a.m. authentication. 2:11 a.m. batch build. 2:17 a.m. SFTP to county vendor. 2:28 a.m. will template printed. 2:31 a.m. OBIT placeholder saved. Each entry wore DW as initiator or supervisor, and the audit trail did the one thing that turns arrogance into evidence. It remembered. The special master asked no questions. He just wrote, sequence consistent, beside times that had once tried to impersonate necessity. The crematory director admitted courtesy liaison had grown like mold in a dark corner. Good intentions. No sunlight. Too much trust in signatures not backed by bodies. The red book entry for me. No remains. Admin pickup. Looked worse on a projector than on a table. He said the words policy failure with enough weight to flatten euphemism. He stapled a practice termination memo to his testimony, and the court filed it without comment, as if to say extinction can be tidy. Den Wilder, interim suspended and visibly smaller, stared at his own pin the way gamblers study dice on a losing night. The court did not let him be theatrical. It instructed him to listen while sentences measured the gap between entitlement and process. Monetary sanctions landed first, calibrated to remind a firm that spreadsheets don't grant absolution. Then a referral order to the bar and the DA, tying case number to conduct so tightly that future footnotes wouldn't need to guess. Finally, a disqualification that unhooked Wilder's suites from the estate like a burr from fabric, irritating to remove, necessary to keep the cloth from pulling apart. Outside, the courthouse steps didn't care. They have seen letters lose their teeth before. But my phone cared in the way rectangles of light do. Probate update pushed to every address on the service list. Scholarship subtrust established. Funded at opening. Distributions to follow audit. The press office for the court issued an 8-sentence bulletin in an English so plain it felt generous. Vital record voided. Estate administration secured. Scholarship preserved. You could explain this to a neighbor and not need to raise your hands. I announced the Warren Pierce Scholarship the way Warren would have preferred, without fanfare. On a one-page site with 4 fields and a checklist that resembled a receipt. Acceptance letter. Invoice, library card barcode. Proof you finished the things you start. The trade school shared it internally. The community college posted it between notices about welding masks and FAFSA. Applications began to arrive with the shyness of firsts. PDFs named by default. Essays written like shop manuals, numbers that knew their jobs. I printed the first 5 and placed them under a magnet shaped like a crescent wrench. Afternoon folded into a version of celebration that fit. The porch swing at Warren's house logged an hour of mild complaining while I ate diner pancakes out of a clamshell and listened to Warren_Pierce_and fraud_tape. Wave. Through a Bluetooth speaker that had wandered into the shed and decided to help. The line that had started as a joke and become a creed. Keep receipts, stuck to sawdust, and felt right. The house had begun to behave like a noun again. Then the PR attempt arrived on schedule, doubt masquerading as spin. A local feature site ran a profile on my cousin framed as protecting Grandpa's legacy, photographed in linen near a fence he hadn't mended. The piece deployed miscommunication like sandbags, leaned on administrative confusion, and suggested the scholarship's reallocation had always been the plan. It cited records that no longer existed and a timeline that wouldn't survive one question. The headline tried to be merciful. The comments were not. The DA answered with the tone that prevents backsliding. A public statement acknowledging receipt of forensic server images, liaison credential logs, crematory chain entries, and a vital record correction. No names beyond those already public. No editorial, just 4 charges under review typed in a row like measurements. Forgery of vital record, filing false instrument, fraud on the court, conspiracy. The last line was the kind of sentence that teaches cities not to mistake quiet for absence. We do not litigate by press. We prosecute by proof. The site turned off comments. My phone turned down its volume. The courthouse turned the page. At home, I built a first awards shortlist from the stack on my fridge. A girl with weld burns like constellations across her wrist who wanted to fabricate benches for the bus stops her town forgot. A single father finishing HVAC at night. Receipts folded into a wallet that had seen better decades. Invoice clipped with hope. A high school senior with a reading list picture in the background and a library barcode that looked like gospel. I wrote their names on an index card and tucked it under the anti-fraud memo because a good ending has to feed the next beginning. At dusk. The registrar's final correction slid into my mailbox like a receipt printed by a machine that had learned manners. Former certificate void. Record amended. Notification sent. I put it in a sleeve labeled receipts and backed it up twice. Light blinked on the router as if to say redundancy can be tender. Night executed its ritual, streetlights that grate on a curve. A neighbor's dog deeply committed to the emotional life of raccoons, a kettle pretending to be a metronome. I typed thank you to the teller who had resigned and sent me her compliance course syllabus. She replied with I will never let accommodation be a verb again. People can be policies that prove themselves. Before bed, I cleaned the kitchen like a closing argument. Wiped the counter until the ghost ring of the scholarship writer's notary seal showed faintly under the light. Straightened the binder until its shadow matched the edge of the table. Checked the WAV file hash. Flipped the porch light on and off to remind the house we decide when light happens here. On the docket. Tomorrow waited with the clerical equivalent of satisfaction. Order allocating farm proceeds to scholarship subtrust signed and entered. DA status. Next update in 30 days. Bar committee. Notice of hearing. None of it felt like triumph. It felt like plumbing repaired. The last thing I did was set out an extra fork beside the pancakes in the fridge because rituals travel better when shared. Warren never believed in solo victories. He believed in work that feeds more work. In the morning, I would finalize the first 3 awards, drive to the school where canvas aprons are uniforms, and hand an envelope to someone who will make Steele remember it was meant to be useful. Somewhere across town, a server image would sit in a vault learning to be an exhibit. Somewhere else, a press kit would discover that reputation cannot be scheduled between 2 o'clock and 3:00 a.m. Receipts had outlived the spin. Order had learned its voice. Awards don't need trumpets. They need invoices. The scholarship account cleared its throat at 9:02 a.m., and 3 payments walked into the world like small, deliberate promises: tuition to the registrar, tools to a vendor that smells like oil and cardboard, a semester's worth of books to a campus store that labels everything too carefully to be accused of kindness. Each transfer carried a note Warren would have approved. No late fees, no cash, keep receipts. The fiduciary uploaded confirmations with the prim posture of a system that has learned the pleasure of being exact. The first student met me in a hallway where welders store their jackets on hooks like trophies. Her hands told longer stories than her application. Silver freckles of burn, a thumb with a crescent the color of effort. I handed her an envelope printed in the same unromantic font as court orders, and we stood in the hum of ventilation and possibility. She showed me her library card the way some people show photographs. Barcode, scuffs, a sticker that said read Warren Tawari. The registrar receipt slid into a folder that had been waiting for it. The world moved an inch toward better. Sanctions arrived in sentences. The court quantified conduct into restitution, fees, and disqualification made permanent. Wilder Suites learned the word monitor in a way that does not allow spin. The bar set a hearing that reads like a weather report for reputation. The DA filed a tidy charging document with verbs that don't blink, forgery of a vital record, filing a false instrument, fraud on the court, conspiracy, and a note that cooperation would be weighed. Polite words had finished their transformation into teeth. Back at Warren's house, I performed a ritual that required no permission. Pancakes on a plate that remembers heat, coffee in the chipped white mug angled wrong on purpose, the porch swing doing its complaint song while morning found its balance. I set the anti-fraud memo in the pantry behind a jar of screws and a roll of blue tape, exactly where it could be discovered by anyone who thinks civics is something you can touch. The scholarship directive lived under glass on the hallway wall. The ghost ring of the notary seal, visible if you tilt your head the way stubborn people tilt their heads when they're right. The mail brought a certificate that changed nothing and sealed everything. Order allocating farm proceeds to scholarship. Subtrust, entered, and a thin, embarrassed note from a paralegal who had once scheduled my disappearance and now preferred nouns like acknowledged and complied. I filed both under receipts because that is where the story belongs, even when the story pretends to be grand. Home resumed itself in ordinary proofs. Butter learned its dents again. The kettle spoke in present tense. I uploaded Warren_Pierce_antifraud_tape.wave to a flash drive and labeled it like a shipping crate, anti-fraud, hashed, do not edit. Then slid a copy to the fiduciary because redundancy is love in a language paper understands. The trade school posted a bulletin board announcement with staples so confident they outlived their own purpose. Students took pictures not because the font was pretty, but because the numbers mattered. Toward evening, a letter arrived from the girl with the welding jacket. Inside, a photograph printed on cheap paper and bright resolve, a bus stop bench welded square. Paint still soft, a small aluminum tag riveted to the back rail. Warren Pierce Scholarship, for people who fix things, keep receipts. Underneath, in handwriting that had already learned to be economical, a sentence that outperformed speeches. My grandma sat while I waited for the bus today. I put the photo on the fridge beside the creed and watched the room accept a new proof. Utility as memorial. Final updates landed without ceremony. The registrar issued the final correction with a seal that pressed hard enough to ghost onto the next page. Wilder Suite's server image moved to a vault with evidence numbers that sound like winter. The crematory retired courtesy liaison as if it had been a costume found at the back of a closet and finally thrown away. A local paper ran 8 lines about the scholarship and used the word audit like praise. The cousin stopped posting. Night did not need to be dramatic. I wiped the counter until the wood reflected the kitchen light, and the ghost ring gleamed faintly under it like a horizon. On the wall, 3 lines had become doctrine, normalized verifications. Check logs, not letters. Build the house that can stand an audit. The house stood. The logs had written. The audit had fed steel. Before sleep, I laid a 4th line under the 3, written in my worst handwriting so it wouldn't try to be a slogan. Make ordinary difficult to steal. The scholarship would do that in small, repetitive ways, term after term, invoice after invoice, workbench after workbench, until the bus stop benches in this town told the story better than I could. In the morning, I would sign the next batch, fold the next receipts, and visit the trade school to see if paint dries faster when a room wants it to. Somewhere across town, a server would rest in a vault, learning to be a cautionary tale. Somewhere else, a porch swing would complain to a sky that doesn't judge. Paper did not crown anyone. It held. Steel remembered its purpose, and that was enough. Thank you for watching this story on True Tales Hub. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next story. That we post new tales twice a day, and each one comes with unexpected twists you won't see coming.